Welcome to Pride and Prejudice, the podcast that breaks barriers and opens the pages to inclusivity and understanding. I'm your host, Jason Oliveira. Today we're joined by a very special guest, Miss Murru, who is in her second year as LHS's media specialist. Miss Murru has been a certified librarian for 4 years and has a deep passion for literature and making sure the Media Center reflects the diversity of our student body. Miss Murru, it's wonderful to have you here with us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
No, of course. I'm glad to have you here. So, Ms. Murru, could you start by sharing what inspired you to become a media specialist?
Absolutely. So I will say that I was very fortunate growing up that I had a wonderful group of librarians in my local public library. They were both children's librarians and young adult librarians. They always held books for me. They always knew when I was coming in. They talked to me about my titles that I had just read, and I just felt so involved and that they appreciated me as a reader. And I think that's really where it started. And then up until last year, I was working in a public library after, I went to library school and decided to do that. But I really, working in a public library was fantastic, but I kind of missed getting to know people on a more closer level. I love working with students. And seeing the same faces every day in a public library, it's a little bit different. So I've loved my experience here so far, and I'm hoping to be here for a while.
Well, I can say I definitely appreciate you being here at the high school, and you've definitely helped me understand a lot new. You've helped me hear about new titles, and you've shared a lot of new titles to me as well. I know we've talked about books together a couple times too, so I'm very glad that you're here at the high school. What role has literature played in your personal and professional life?
So personally, I will say I've always been a reader. I love reading. It's very rare that you'll find me without a book in my hand. So personally, it's just throughout life's challenges, when I've been stressed, usually books are my way to calm down. They're consistent for me. That's kind of been a consistent throughout my life. In terms of professionally, working with a great staff, I get recommendations all the time. I love to see what students are reading for classes, talking to them about that. So I think just being surrounded by books is just, you can't go wrong.
Definitely. I also read books in my free time for whenever I'm stressed or maybe want to learn a new topic or someone else's story, basically, because that's what books are. It's other people's stories. Mm-hmm. So talking a little more about literature, specifically LGBTQ literature, how has it evolved over the years, both generally and within the LHS Media Center?
So I will say I was not hugely familiar about this topic, so I did look into it a little bit because I didn't want to have nothing to say about it. So I did find this really interesting article from Penguin Publishing. They kind of were pointing out some different queer stories that you've seen over the years, specifically with Greek mythology. And I thought that was really cool because they were analyzing it in a way that one thing, despite the ancient Greeks being so patriarchal of a society, a lot of the stories kind of have gender fluidity in them, and I thought that was really cool. Again, granted, they weren't very respectful of all of the characters, but seeing that displayed in those stories was really cool. They even went into different stories in Ireland and different characters. So I can absolutely send that to you if you're interested in reading it. Speaking in the context of schools, I definitely think that there are so many incredible LGBTQ authors out there and, different stories that we can find and, showcase in our media center. The unfortunate part that kind of goes hand in hand with that, especially now, is that a lot of book bans are popping up. If you look at the ALA, which is the American Library Association, their top 10 most challenged books of 2023, the top 3 titles, which are Genderqueer by Maya Kobabe, All Boys Aren't Blue by George Johnson, and This Book is Gay by Juno Dawson, all list, LGBTQIA content as one of the reasons that the titles were challenged, among other reasons. But I think as this kind of topic is more prevalent in the news now and on everybody's radar, that's the one unfortunate part that we're experiencing.
Yeah, there has been a lot of book banning recently and specifically targeted at LGBTQ literature. And unfortunately, a lot of good titles are being taken away from the hands of kids that could read them and actually benefit from them because even over the years, queer literature used to be very in a negative sort of character trope
Right.
context where, especially in like other media, through movies and whatnot during Hollywood times, gay characters were shown as, child predators and drag queens and in very harmful ways. And, queer literature back in the day as well portrayed that trope. And I think now it kind of evolved in a way to provide more inclusivity in a way that there are queer characters of all the letters of the queer community, and that they all come from different racial and historical backgrounds and cultural backgrounds and different types of hardships that they face. And more often now you see more of a achieving past those hardships than you did before. So that's the benefit of how the literature has evolved over the years.
The characters are more realistic to how actual, lived experiences that people are facing, and they're not kind of stereotypes that we've seen in the past. Absolutely.
So going a little more into that topic though, why is it that representation in literature is crucial, especially for LGBTQ students?
So as a librarian, I've been fortunate to work with so many different people in different walks of life. And, I can only, personally, I know that it's so powerful to see, myself reflected in stories. So having that, and it's not specific to LGBTQ, individuals, or just having stories that are representative of your lived experiences from authors that are actually, have lived these experiences as well. I think that's so important. Definitely plays a role in how students feel, because, if students are struggling and they don't know, they don't have an outlet, they don't understand their emotions yet, seeing characters in books that are reflective of how they're feeling can provide that for them, especially if they don't have the resources. And this goes to young students too, especially. Like, we're seeing so many kids that need these titles. And that this goes across the board for everything, seeing yourself reflected in any way, whether it be culture, race, anything. Just having representation is incredibly important to developing and feeling heard. I think that's the most important.
I agree. And one of the other big ones in media that's been recently getting represented and more healthy and out there is neurodivergent people. It's become very popular now in kids' TV shows and children's books. And that's something that, as well, back in the day was also shown more negative.
Yes, absolutely. You're right. And I think, it's so important that these voices are featured, that, in all kinds of media, specifically books, but having that out there really, really makes, I think, not only the students themselves or the children or, even adults that are experiencing this, but knowing, like, let's say parents know that their child will be able to find media that actually is reflective of them, and they don't have to, try to explain to their child, like, why am I not represented in these titles or these movies or shows?
I think it also allows parents and friends and family members to also understand more into the eyes of that person, the emotions of that person, because surely they are not that person. They don't understand exactly what that person's going through. So having access to this media, other people who aren't exactly aware and educated of different hardships and lifestyles and sexualities, or people with are neurodivergent, allows other people to understand more of what they're going through and be able to open their mind to be able to support them and understand how they can help them, and allows them to see them as more human and respect them the same way.
Absolutely. I think you're completely, right on the ball with that. So I am not part of the LGBTQ community, but, reading stories about characters and about, from authors that are representative of this, I just think it's so incredibly powerful for me, because I kind of can see what they've experienced, what they're feeling, and I think it's really, really powerful. So I definitely think that this is something that's so important, and that's why voices and, diverse voices specifically are so incredibly important.
So back to the topic of book banning. Amongst that, what other challenges do you face when trying to include diverse and inclusive books in our school media center's collection?
So I will say I'm very fortunate that, while I've been here, I haven't had any issues with book banning. knock on wood, that stays the same. I think the greatest challenge that I face at this point is, there's not enough time ever to find all the wonderful books out there that are representative of different voices, and also there's not enough money. So that'll be my challenge in the next couple of years, to try to not only leverage kind of the money that I do have for purchasing titles in the media center, but also maybe looking elsewhere to see if I can apply for grants and other avenues of getting more titles for the media center.
Well, I wish you good luck on that.
Thank you.
How do you ensure that the LGBTQ literature available in the media center covers a diverse range of voices and experience within the community?
So I do my best in order to try to keep an eye on different publishers. I also look at the school library journal, which is a wonderful resource for librarians and other educators. They always post book reviews for titles that are upcoming and newly released. I also follow a ton of fabulous librarians on social media. That way I can see what they're recommending, what they're purchasing for their libraries. That's a really good way to keep connected. And I also it's a lot of research. So sometimes things will take me a little bit more time, and then I have to kind of weigh my options of, is this something that I think would benefit the community? And I also take recommendations from people. So if you read a title that, of course, fits the young adult metric, and you've read it or you've heard about it and you're interested in it, I absolutely send the title my way. I'd be happy to look into it further. There's also a really cool site called We Need Diverse Books. They're like a nonprofit that basically supports librarians and also authors that are diverse and are trying to publish their works. And they often have different articles that you can read about titles that they've done or they've published. And it's really just another avenue. Like there's so many great sites out there, so it's kind of hard to keep track of all of them, but it's something that I am very passionate about, and I want to make sure that I'm finding titles that are going to be supported by the Lyndhurst community and that are different, they're representing different voices in that, LGBTQ sphere.
That's excellent to hear. Can you share an instance where a book significantly impacted a student or started an important conversation at our school?
So I can speak to one student recently had selected a title for their research paper for the English 4 classes. And initially they went into it a bit hesitantly. They're like, it was Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Sayens, if I pronounced that correctly. And I think they were thrown off with the title. They thought it was going to be about something completely different than what the story actually turned out to be. And I think, after reading the entire title, the student actually went along and read the second book and was, even more so obsessed with it. And I think what was so important, what I took from that conversation, is that they said that they really identified with the two characters in that story. And it's really like a coming of age story. The two main characters are gay, and it's kind of, not only is it like kind of their, getting, not only is it a love story or a blossoming love story, but it's also about, finding yourself as a person. And I just think, I personally read that book and I absolutely love it. Also, Lin-Manuel Miranda voices the audiobook version. So if you like him, definitely listen to that, because I read the book a couple of times and then also listened to it. And it was just a totally different experience. So I think, when students feel comfortable telling me those stories, it makes me just feel even better about my collection or the, the high school's collection, and, actually hearing that something touched them in some way. I think that's really important.
What recent additions to the Media Center collection are you excited about, particularly in the realm of LGBTQ literature?
So I'm pretty excited about this title called Gwen and Art Are Not in Love by Lex Croucher. I have not read it, but it's on my to-read list. And I was looking at Goodreads, because Goodreads is just I call it the Facebook for books, but I know you guys don't use Facebook. But it gives so many great summaries. People can, read comments about titles that they've enjoyed. But anyway, they put this little synopsis of the title. They liken it to Heartstopper meets A Knight's Tale, and this queer medieval rom-com YA debut about love, friendship, and being brave enough to change the course of history. So the main character is actually a descendant of King Arthur. And he's betrothed to a woman, but he actually likes boys. So I just think, this kind of reimagining of stories is just really fun. And I love rom-coms. I love, happy love. So I think it's really something that I'm itching to read. And we have it on display in the media center right now. So if you guys want to check it out, let me know. Another title is, this one's not super new, but it's called The Honeys by Ryan LaSala, which is a horror novel following a character named Mars, whose gender fluidity often excludes him from his family's traditions. And that's on my to-read list as well.
Interesting. I had never heard of those titles, but I'll definitely probably look into them. That one about King Arthur, the descendant of King Arthur, sounded a lot familiar to one of the recent ones that came out a couple years ago, and then they made the whole movie. I wasn't a fan of the movie, but it was red, white, and royal blue.
Okay. Yes.
Basically, you have the son of a president of the U.S., who also is a woman in the book. And then you also have the prince of the king and queen of England. And both of them developed a relationship with each other. And it's a very interesting thing because such political figures usually, and it's shown in the book, they try to sway the view of the public. And they tried to keep, once that got, out there, they tried to keep that
under wraps.
Yeah. Pretty much,
I watched the Amazon Prime
I wasn't a fan of the movie. The book is better.
I did not read the book, but it's definitely on my to-read list. There's just too much media out there to consume that I have to pick and choose sometimes.
So, going a little more into certain titles, could you recommend some must-read books for our students, and what makes these books stand out?
So I will say, I know I just said it, but Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe is such a great book. It's realistic fiction, so if you don't like fantasy, I tend to skew towards fantasy books. So I know that sometimes I always have to have in my repertoire a good recommendation. Again, that one's not fairly new. It's really a really great story about just finding yourself at its very core, and I think that's really important. Another story that I read called The Sunbearer Trials by Aidan Thomas. That one is really unique because it kind of reminded me of Hunger Games and Percy Jackson. It was a really cool, again, it's a fantasy book, but it has gods and there's some type of trial called Sunbearer Trials. So if I'm remembering correctly, the story, follows a character named Tio, and he is the trans son of Kistal, which is the goddess of birds. So it's such a cool story. And I know that kind of probably doesn't make any sense. So I would recommend you guys read the summary of this title. It's such a cool series. It really is. And I think actually book 2 hasn't been published yet. So I would say if you don't want to wait, I would wait until the second book comes out before you read the first one. And I know we actually had read that title in book club, and a lot of the students really, really enjoyed it. So it's definitely one to look out for. And then also, if people are more inclined to read, stories about or more autobiographical stories, I have a book in the media center. I have not read it, but I do recommend it. It's always on various lists. It's called Messy Roots by Laura Gao, and it's actually a graphic novel. So we do have graphic novels, so I just want to point that out there. So if you guys are not big readers and you want to check out a book that doesn't have as much text on the page, definitely check that one out. I do also have some student recommendations. This is from Parker Conklin. We have a title called What If It's Us by Becky Albertalli and Adam Silvera. Aristotle and Dante, of course. And then one that is a middle grade book, so not high school, is Star-Crossed by Barbara D. I have not read that one, but Parker says it's a wonderful title.
I've heard a few of those titles. I definitely haven't heard of most of them. I'm going to check out some of those definitely because they did sound pretty interesting. There are plenty of really good LGBTQ reads out there, especially from the pre 2000s. I know there's a lot of big titles that have a lot of respect to them for the content that they're putting out in the time period.
Absolutely.
But the ones I know obviously are a little more recent, such as Am I Blue, which is a book with many authors, so I couldn't list them. It's just a bunch of original stories from about coming out, with their personal stories from dealing with friends, family, and how people reacted and how they reacted. Some heartbreaking, some hopeful and enlightening and loving, and it is a really good book. It has different stories from coming out, from gay to bi to trans to all the other letters of the LGBTQ community. Another good one, also has a very popular movie to it, is Call Me by Your Name by Andre Aciman, I believe is how you say it. A very well known. A personal favorite of mine, Autobiography by Christina Lauren. I just love that one so much because it's someone who, it brings in the religion aspect of being gay. One of the characters that this boy likes is Mormon. That book really touched me. And another good one I really liked was Boy Meets Boy by David Leviathan. I mentioned earlier Red, White, and Royal Blue, but that's by Casey McQuiston. I realized I never mentioned the author. And another all-time of my favorite that many know is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller.
Yeah, that one is on almost all the lists.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
That's a really known well book. Goes into the Greek mythology of it. And two of my favorite, if you're into horror and if you're more into thriller and horror books, but also into the LGBTQ realm, two of my favorites that I've read was Bathhouse by PJ Vernon and Swipe Right for Murder by Derek Millman. I mean, those two books, they flawlessly bring in the lifestyle of someone part of the community to a reality of hardships within the struggles and safety issues that many LGBTQ people face going outside in public. But however, beyond the books, what other resources does our media center offer to support our LGBTQ students?
So I will say, firstly, those titles, all that you just said, sound fabulous. So I'm definitely putting those on my to-read list. So in terms of other resources, so I do send out typically a monthly newsletter to the student population and faculty. So I try to include as many resources as possible. Specifically, in June when it's LGBTQ Awareness Month, I try to put as many resources as possible out there. I definitely think that I can do a lot more in that avenue, just to be supportive of our students. So if you have any recommendations for me, please send them my way.
Now, looking to the future, how do you see the role of LGBTQ literature changing in educational institutions like ours?
So I definitely think, despite all of these book bans, I definitely think things are looking up, because the important part is that there are so many conversations surrounding these topics, a lot for the positive. So with wonderful organizations like the American Library Association and the American Association of School Librarians, supporting educators and librarians, and also other groups that I mentioned, like We Need Diverse Books. Shelves will continue to be full with LGBTQ titles. Whether people want them to or not, they will, persevere. I don't think it will be easy, but I definitely think that, I'm very hopeful for the future and that things will change.
It's definitely an ongoing struggle and fight for getting this education out there for people, because a lot of people just never receive the education of being able to be open-minded and understand that there are other people in this world. And unfortunately, a lot of people have a big sense of entitlement and forget that there are other people that exist in this world, and think that a one shoe fits all. And that mindset we've learned is definitely outdated. But a lot of people are still stuck in their ways and trying to reverse the progressive nature of where the country is trying to go, at least.
Yeah, I think that, again, I'm very hopeful that things will continue going. And we need, the organization We Need Diverse Books, they're a nonprofit, and they try to support authors. I think that's kind of where, in the realm of publishing, it's so difficult. And, a lot of large publishing companies go under fire because they're kind of very selective with the authors that they choose to highlight and support, and, who ends up on the New York Times bestsellers list. So I think, encouraging and having organizations that encourage these, different authors and, creators in any forms is kind of where we need to start pushing for, because then once they have that support, then their voices can get out there, their stories can get out there, and then, then they end up on our shelves.
And more people, hear about it and understand these stories and are able to put themselves in other people's shoes and have some more sympathy, if not empathy.
Absolutely.
How do you envision the Media Center role in fostering a more inclusive and supportive environment for all students?
I definitely think a goal of mine is to ensure that this space remains comfortable for students, for faculty, anybody that wants to feel supported in any way can come here and know that this is a space that's, accepting of everyone. I want people to be comfortable to be here and to sit in here and, pick up titles. Don't pick up titles. It's okay. I just want them to feel included. And, most importantly, I want people to also be supportive of one another. I think that's really important. And I've been fortunate. I think everyone in this school is very, very open as far as I can see, or I've experienced, and at least, especially in the context of the Media Center. I'm always in the Media Center, so I can only really speak to the space. So I think keeping diverse titles and, characters that are LGBTQ on display, having, bulletin boards that represent different people or different, celebrations every month. Overall, just, again, making sure this space is something that people feel comfortable coming to. I never want people to feel like that they're not included or that they can't use the space or take advantage of the titles that are here. That's really, really important to me. And just as a librarian in general, take the Media Center out of it. Just in general, we want people and patrons to feel comfortable in whatever space that we have.
Definitely. I applaud you for that. I think a lot of our student body here at the school can also be very thankful for you for contributing to that inclusive space.
Thank you.
You mentioned being open to book recommendations from students. How do you encourage students to engage with the Media Center and suggest new titles?
So I try to do different displays pretty often. Back in February, we did Blind Date with a Book. So that's kind of, I give a little synopsis on the cover of the title, or I'm sorry, on the cover of the wrapping of the title, and people are meant to just blindly pick a title. So, my goal with that is that you'll pick up a book that maybe it's the same genre of a title that you always, read, maybe you gravitate towards mysteries, but the point is the characters may not be characters that you typically would have expected. So I think getting people interested in books in that way, kind of diversifies how they're obtaining titles and you're not judging the book by its cover. And in terms of book recommendations, again, when I send out my monthly newsletters, I do have a little feedback box or whatever on there that links to a Google form where students can recommend titles or recommend anything that they want to see happen in the Media Center. I'm actually working on, posting a couple of flyers in the Media Center that will link to that same QR code or that Google form. That way people can, in real time, they're here, they want to recommend a title, and they, I don't think people read their emails at LHS, especially students. So I highly doubt they're all looking at my newsletter. So I think adding that extra step of posting something around the Media Center is another way of getting it. And also, I don't want people to be afraid to tell me recommendations to my face. Every time someone recommends a title to me, I jot it down on a Post-it note. Of course, I can't promise that every single book you recommend I will be able to purchase. I have to look into it a little bit, but I want this space to have titles that people want to read, and that's really important to me.
Definitely, and like I said, I applaud you for that. What message would you like to give to students who might be hesitant to check out books from the Media Center?
To that question, I will first say all the books in the Media Center are available for checkout. I can't tell you how many times a month people ask me, "Oh, I didn't know I could take these books out," or they'll just question it. Yes, you can check books out from the media center. And, you know, I will say one thing that I learned working in a public library is that you, as someone checking out a book for, if let's say, Jason, you come up to me and check out a book, I will not be pointing out the cover. I will not be saying, oh, you know, we will not say anything about the title, because that just makes people nervous. So if you have someone that's, you know, checking out a book on, you know, about with LGBTQ characters for the first time, and I go ahead and point out like, oh, did you know the main character is gay? How would that make you feel?
I mean, it depends, you know?
Right.
I mean, you know, if I didn't know that's what the book is about, then I'd feel like, you know, well...
Essentially, what I'm trying to say is it'll put you on the spot a little bit, and I think some people don't do well with that, which is completely fair. So what I will say is, like, again, this space is completely neutral. These titles were purchased with the hope that people check them out. So I don't want people to feel nervous or worried if they're checking out a title that is, you know, not their typical read, or has, you know, characters that, you know, are new to them. So that's kind of my biggest, you know, hope, is that like people feel comfortable. And, you know, I will only say anything. I'll be like, I read that book. It's fantastic. That's the only feedback you'll get from me. And then when you return it, if you want to talk about it, absolutely. But yeah, I try to be as neutral as possible, because I know that some students might be a little bit hesitant, or they might be fearful, or maybe they even had a negative experience at a different library. And I want to make sure that that's not what happens here.
Finally, what do you think are the most important actions we as a school community can take to better support and celebrate LGBTQ voices and stories through literature?
So I think, of course, number one, you know, purchasing titles that are reflective of these voices, sharing resources with students and faculty. I also think, you know, possibly having some workshops might be beneficial for the, you know, the larger community. And, you know, I really do think that knowing what resources are out there are really important, because, you know, I learn something new every day, and that to me is very important, even on topics that I'm not hugely familiar with. You know, one of the questions you asked me, I had to look into a little bit, just because I didn't really know the entire, you know, and I still can't encapsulate all of the history of, you know, LGBTQ literature. But, you know, learning and looking into that is just really powerful. And I think as a school community, being aware of resources and knowing where to find them is really important, and can overall benefit the school as a whole.
All right. So thank you, Ms. Murru, for sharing your insights and for your dedication to enriching our media center with such diverse and important literature.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the time you've spent asking all these wonderful questions.
Of course, and I'm glad to have you here and share your knowledge and your personal experiences as well. To our listeners, I hope today's episode inspires you to explore new perspectives and perhaps check out some of the books we discussed today. Remember, every book opens a door to a new world, and through these texts, we can find understanding and common ground. Don't forget to visit the Media Center and maybe even recommend your favorite book to Ms. Murru. Tune in next month for another episode of Pride and Prejudice, where we continue to celebrate and learn about the vibrant tapestry of identities that make up our community. This is Jason Oliveira signing off. Keep reading, keep learning, and keep supporting each other.